Can you swap the annular boosters from the AVS2 into the older Performer Series carburetor? Let's find out today. That is a question that I get asked very frequently on these videos, especially when I do AVS2 type content. And a lot of folks still run the older Performer Series carburetor. Great carburetor, works extremely well. The AVS2 is just a very nice upgrade with the annular booster on the primary side. Throttle response is so much better with that annular booster on that low to mid range. Now, top end horsepower, I don't think it makes that much of a difference, to be honest with you. You're flowing fuel and a lot of fuel and air at that time, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But from a drivability standpoint, the annular booster in the AVS2 is just amazing. Fun to drive, really fun to drive on that carburetor. But the question always remains, can you take the boosters out of the Performer Series carburetor, swap in the ones from the AVS2, and will the carburetor work as good as the AVS2? Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, I believe that the answer to that is no. And that's after talking to the product manager, the engineers there at Edelbrock, and understanding how that carburetor was tested and what they did to make that carburetor in the very early days. I have an early prototype that I was given for testing back in 2016, I believe that was. So I've seen some of the things that they've gone through to get that right. So the drivability is good, the tuning is good, the ability to make rod and jet changes so you can get the power out of or the drivability out of whether it's the cruise mode or the power mode. All those things come into play, and at that point in time when Edelbrock was developing the AVS2, they decided to go with a little bit more CFM to help that booster meter fuel properly. Now, does that mean that you can't use these in here? Well, we're going to find that out today. As far as physically goes, these boosters will drop right into the Performer Series carburetor, no problem at all. They're the exact same dimensions. Everything's going to work fine. However, there are some differences in how these boosters are made, and we're going to cover that here in just a quick minute. But let me first talk you through how I'm going to go through the test and what I'm going to do to make these two carburetors as compatible as possible, but not overskew the results, because I want more or less a A-B type comparison between the Performer Series carburetor and what it is after the annular boosters are put in. Now, the first thing I think we really have to concentrate is the primary booster itself, because that's where really all the money is made here. The primary boosters on the AVS2 obviously are an annular style, where on the Performer Series style, it's a straight leg, or what most people incorrectly call a down leg style. It's universal, I guess, that term more than anything, but it is a nozzle style booster that just essentially drops a stream of fuel in it as the air comes through here, through the venturi. As the pressure drops here, it draws the fuel out of the fuel bowl through the jet, and in through the booster, and sends it down into the venturi of the carburetor, into the intake manifold, and then obviously get burned. The nice thing about the annular, obviously, that we've talked about quite a length here, and I've done tons of videos on the annular carburetor, and I'll leave some of those links down below if you want to take a look at them. But because of the spray pattern, the way that the fuel is pulled out of there, and all those little holes that the fuel can come through there, it allows it to break up a little bit easier and atomize the fuel and air a little bit, giving a little bit more throttle response is what it ends up feeling like. So that's the primary difference. Now, are these pretty much the same? When you look at it, they are cast out of the same body, but they are a little different. If you look at how the pickup tubes are at on the primary side, they're not that far off. Everything is indexed pretty close to the same. There are some, where these holes are placed as it pulls in the fuel and air mixture through the booster is a little bit different, but for the most part, you could probably call these close enough. Now, on the secondary side, which we're going to do as well too, they are a bit different in how they pick up fuel. Now, one thing we can't duplicate is the AVS2 has the air valve secondary, where on the Performer Series, you've got the weighted air valve. There is no adjustment on the secondary here. The AVS2 gives you that ability to pull in the secondaries and the fueling when you want it. So that does change a little bit of how these are configured, but will that make a difference? Now, when we do this, I'm not going to just swap the primary boosters into this and work it that way. Let's do the full swap. Let's take a look at the primary booster, secondary booster out of the performer and swap everything over. Now, that is a 1906 carburetor. This is a 1406 carburetor. So I need to assemble this one back together. Right now, these are both broken apart, so we can show you that everything, and I've got the boosters obviously out of both of them. Now let's talk about the setup. There's a few things that are a little bit different, and there's some major differences between the two, but that is the question that I get asked over and over and over again. Can I put annular boosters in a Performer Series carburetor? So some of the limitations on this carburetor we're not going to be able to change. Again, the secondaries are metered different. This is a 650. This is a 600. I think we're going to find that that's going to come into play here very quickly. These can both be tuned very similar. The rods and jets are the same physical size, but we have to be a little bit careful on how we tune the Performer when we get to that point, because using just the rod and jet off of the 1906 tuning chart or the 1905 tuning chart is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to have to watch fuel a little bit just to make sure that we're not trying to overfuel this thing, or in what I believe is going to happen is to correct some issues that we may have with the amount of airflow. Again, slightly smaller carburetor, but I do still believe that that is certainly because of the AVS2 booster. The annular booster needs a little bit more airspeed and volume to get those to meter fuel correctly. As I was thinking about this, I wanted to make it as fair as possible, but also very much a real world example of how most of this happens. Now, let's be extremely honest and brutally honest here. Most people bolt these carburetors on and adjust the idle mixture and maybe the idle speed, and they don't do any tuning. Idle mixture, idle speed, choke adjustments, those are all initial setups on a carburetor. Those are not tuning adjustments. That's not tuning at all. You're not tuning a carburetor by setting the idle mixture, idle speed, choke, whatever it is. None of those are tuning. When you get into tuning, that is actually changing the fuel mixture that the carburetor is demanding depending on the RPM and the situation that you're driving in, whether it's off idle, whether it's cruise, whether it's wide open throttle. When you make changes to how much the carburetor sees in fuel, plus on the Edelbrock carburetor with a step-up spring change to match when you want the primary booster to flow the full amount of fuel, all those are tuning. That is what carburetor tuning is in this instance. So what we're going to do with this, I'm going to set this back with the factory rod and jet on both the primary and secondary, put the boosters in it, assemble the carburetor, and then we will go drive it as is. Because again, overwhelming majority of the comments I get are very much that same. When I ask, and somebody's having a problem, and I ask, tell me what you've done to tune the carburetor, and it's typically those two things. I set the idle mixture screws and got the idle speed dialed in, and that was it. So we're going to start there. Then I think what we'll do is I will slowly start to make some adjustments to this thing, try to tune it. We'll probably work a little bit with the step-up springs because I have a feeling that at that 1,500 to probably about 2,500, I think is where we're going to see the most dramatic effects on the data that we're going to log out of this thing. Now, let's talk about that really quickly. I would love to have some more sophisticated data logging equipment for this, but at this time, nobody in the aftermarket really makes a good aftermarket data logging setup for a carburetor, meaning a dual O2 sensor, one in the driver's side, one in the passenger side, if you're a header, exhaust, whatever. That's critical, I think. I am using a single O2 sensor on the passenger side on the GMC truck, so that's where we're going to log it out of. We're going to take a look at engine RPM, we're going to take a look at engine vacuum, and that's going to be primarily it. I would love to, and I probably should look at putting a TPS on here so we can read throttle position so we know exactly what percentage the throttle is opening during all these times and events. I would love to have an EGT gauge in there to measure exhaust temperature just to take a look at. Now that's going to be a little bit subjective when you're just cruising around, but it can help you understand that if what the AFR setting is seeing, how hot the exhaust is getting and what that efficiency is on the burn side of things. But again, we're just going to go a little basic here because, again, I think that's what most folks are going to potentially have. Now, AFR is a little bit on the outlier of that, but hey, those of y'all that have made the choice to make that investment and put an AFR gauge in, you know how invaluable they are to helping you get a carburetor dialed in. So that's what we're going to do. Now, let me do this. I'm going to get this 1406 built. I'm going to swap in all the boosters. I'm not going to bore you with all the video and details of all that because it's going to take me a little bit of time. I do need to clean this one up just a hair, but it's a fairly newer 1406. It's got a little bit of wear and tear on it, but it was the best one I had here. So we're going to give it every opportunity to go together as best we can. So let me go ahead and get this thing assembled, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the setup really quickly, and then we'll get this on the truck and we'll start driving and see how it's doing. We're all back together, and a couple of details here just to go over. Electric choke, I did not hook this up. It is wired completely open. Reason being is the AFR on the truck is powered by that Keon 12-volt hot, so that's the reason why we're not going to use the electric choke. Here's the boosters out of it. Show you some video just on the inside. It assembled nice. There was no issues with it. Obviously, like I said, all of those components and pieces fit in there. It's not, again, it's not like these bodies are cast any differently as far as the overall dimensional shape. However, they are different in how they meter fuel, so it's going to be interesting to see if this will actually meter the fuel properly. And there's some indications that I think this could be an interesting test. So now that we've got it built and pretty much done here, let's get it out, get the 1905 that's on the truck now off, get the 1406 mounted, and yeah, let's start making some test drives and see what happens. Alright, so she's idling a little erratic, and it could be a number of things, but I cleaned the carburetor pretty well, so I know it's not that. I know I don't have any vacuum leaks, so I know it's not that. The AFR gauge is bouncing around quite a bit, so part of the issue with that potentially could be that the idle fuel does route itself through the primary booster. So when we've added a different booster in there that's not really quite made for this carburetor. Remember, we talked about airspeed and airflow. It's really not designed for it. So I'm going to have to see how it works out as we get to driving. Now we're fully up to operating temperature. The O2's up to operating temperature. So I've eliminated all of those things. So it could be that. We're just going to have to monitor the AFR. So I'm going to do that. Let me get everything else hooked up underneath hood, get the air cleaner on, and let's go for a test drive and see how it does. off the gas. Man, we need to add a lot of fuel to that. I don't think it's metering fuel. Wow, that is awful. Yeah, we're gonna have to start adding a lot of fuel to it. Now I've got the silver spring in it like it was said from the factory, so obviously it's a 1406, so it's gonna be dead lean anyway in this situation. But man, it did not like that a bit. So let me get the tuning chart out and see where we're gonna go next. But yeah, we're gonna have to add some fuel to this thing, see if we can make it a little happier. Not even at 1500 RPM. We were around 1200 RPM, just kind of idling through the neighborhood, and just a little off idle. Not much. Again, I wish I had a TPS on here. I guess maybe hindsight I'll do that on the next type of video for this. But anyway, let's add some fuel and see what happens. Kind of an odd situation. I keep having to monkey around with taking a little bit of fuel out of idle. Right now, I've got it to where I'm happy with it. You know, anywhere from between 13.5 and 14 is good, you know, for me at idle. I typically don't go super lean on idle. There's really no reason to, unless you're really, you know, concerned about fuel economy, whatever. The trouble that I'm having is you can see the tach kind of bouncing a little bit there. It's really erratic. It's really inconsistent. It's just weird. I'm struggling with, you know, where its happy spot is. I'm getting this a 55 mile per hour road here. I'm going to get aggressive on the gas here in just a quick second, see how we go. But adding the more fuel anyway with the new map or the new rod and jet seemed to help out a little bit. But let's see if we can get into the secondaries and see how this looks. But right now it's just kind of weird. So let's get a little bit more aggressive on the gas here and see what it does. Kind of stuck here. I don't really know what else to do. I've worked on this now for about 2 days. I probably have a total about maybe 7-8 hours, I guess, total. Weather's good. We're in the upper 60s, low 70s, during the day when I've been monkeying with this thing. And the trouble that I'm coming up with is that there's no consistency to it. It is not giving me good AFR readings. Typically on a AFR setup with a properly dialed in carburetor, if you want it around 13 and a half, 13.8, 13.7, up to 14 at idle. Typically on a good, off idle, just kind of cruising, not aggressively starting, whatever. You could drop down, into the low 13s, but typically it stabilizes itself back up, and then, that mid-range, RPM, just kind of cruising, moving down the road. You'll get into that 13.5, 13.0, range somewhere in there. If you're getting on the expressway or highway or whatever, sometimes it'll drop a little lower as the secondary fueling and everything kicks in. But this has just been a really weird situation from the start. I can't for the life of me. I'm struggling with understanding that 50 CFM makes that big of a difference. But I was told that. I was told that it was going to be a little erratic. It was going to be a little inconsistent. That you were going to struggle with some funny lean spots at those RPM ranges, down, around that 1200, 1500 up to 2500, just depending on, fuel and temperature and timing and all those other things. But it's really weird. Wide open throttle. I've added a lot of fuel in the secondary as well too. I'll have to look and see. I'll put it on the screen what calibration we ended up with on the tuning chart for the 1905, 1906, because that's what I went to. But I made 6 or 7 of those adjustments, trying to find a sweet spot. Changed step-up springs a few times, to try to either delay it or bring in fuel, kind of when it was supposed to. The vacuum on this engine is really good, so I run the silver spring anyway. But, man, it's just been terribly inconsistent. So, does it run? Yes. Does it get down the road? Absolutely. Am I concerned about that weird 16, 17, reading on the AFR at, moderate cruise speed and kind of, getting up to, speed or adding a little bit more, going from like 30 miles per hour up to like 40, 50. Yeah, very concerned about that. That's when things start to cook and not, operate so well internally. You get much leaner than that and you put a lot of load on it and then you start melting pistons, and that's not very fun. So I'm really I'm struggling here, trying to really. I think I'm going to leave this carburetor together. My thought was take it apart, put the 1406 boosters on it, put this carburetor on the website, get rid of it, sell it, whatever. But I think I may come back to this. I'm going to think about it for a while, see if maybe there's something else I could do. I played with timing a little bit. I took some out. Right now it's currently around 16. And it seemed to like that a little bit, but again, we're fluctuating so aggressively with the AFR, it was hard to really figure out what to do with it. So will the car, or will this engine, run, idle, start, drive down the road? Yes, it absolutely will. Does it run the way it should? Absolutely not. And I think that's the lesson I'm going to take away from it. I'll think about it. Maybe there's some things I can try to smooth that out and get a little bit better. But for now, I'm going to call this a failure. So if you've got any questions on this one, don't hesitate. Leave them down below. If you've got some ideas or some thoughts of what I did wrong or how you would have done it differently, or maybe you've done the same thing and it works wonderful for you, leave the comments down below. I'd like to hear it. I may disagree with you. I may have a conversation with you to tell you what I've found and what I'm seeing. But yeah, when you actually start to look at the data log, it just doesn't work out. This thing idles not very nice. It's just bounces all over the place. That's not what it normally does with the AVS2 on here. This engine is brand new. It's a crate engine from Blueprint. It's pretty flawless on the AVS2, but 1406 with the annular booster out of a 1906 doesn't really work that well. So anyway, argue about it down in the comments. And yeah, now I know why Edelbrock does not offer those annular boosters as a kit to upgrade your 1406. They do offer a kit. Buy a 1906 or a 1905 if you want the annular booster. They don't really work that well in the 1406. So anyway, we'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll see you.